On the 3rd of May 2007, in the coastal village of Praia da Luz, southern Portugal, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, from the United Kingdom, vanished from the apartment where she was sleeping with her younger twin siblings. Her parents, Kate and Gerry McCann, were having dinner with friends at a restaurant about 50 meters away. They took turns checking on the children at regular intervals. At around 10 o'clock that night, when Kate returned to the room, Madeleine was gone. The window was open. The Portuguese police were called shortly after, but the scene was never secured. Guests and staff entered the apartment before investigators arrived, compromising potential evidence. There were no external security cameras and no direct witnesses. The investigation began at a disadvantage. News spread quickly. Within hours, British media crews arrived in Portugal. The name Madeleine McCann appeared in headlines across the world, becoming a global symbol of missing children. With no physical evidence, two main lines of investigation emerged: a premeditated abduction or an accident followed by concealment. Conflicting methods between the Portuguese and British. Police soon created tension, while Portuguese investigators focused on the parents. British authorities insisted the child had been taken by a third party. In September of that year, Kate and Gerry McCann were formally declared suspects, but no solid evidence supported the accusation. The case was closed in July of 2008. In 2011, the British government launched Operation Grange, led by the Metropolitan Police Service in London. To review all existing material, roughly 40,000 documents were reassessed, and more than 8,000 leads were analysed. No conclusive results were found. Madeleine remained missing. In 2020, German authorities identified a new suspect, Christian Bruckner, a German national with a history of sexual offences and drug trafficking. He had been living in the Algarve region at the time of the disappearance. Prosecutors stated they believed Madeleine was dead and that Bruckner was responsible, but no material evidence was ever presented. No DNA, no body, and no direct witnesses. In the years 2023 and 2025, investigative teams from Portugal, Germany, and the United Kingdom conducted new searches in areas near Praia da Luz and at a reservoir close to the city of Lagos. Ground-penetrating radars, drones, and cadaver dogs were deployed. No human remains were found. The case has also become an object of study in communication and criminology. Experts describe it as a hyper-mediated narrative phenomenon where public exposure and popular theories influence the direction of an investigation. The absence of objective proof, combined with constant media coverage, created a cycle of speculation that never stopped. By the time the case was officially archived in July of 2008, the atmosphere around the investigation had already changed. The first months were marked by the raw urgency of a missing child. The following years were shaped by public debate, legal contradictions, and the slow decay of collective certainty. Once a case loses its immediacy, it becomes something else, part evidence, part narrative. The McCann disappearance entered this phase quickly. With no conclusive forensic material, the discussion turned to credibility, timelines, and interpretation. Who had seen what? How reliable was each statement? The absence of a verifiable sequence transformed the case into a study of perception itself. Portugal's Polícia Judiciária closed the file citing insufficient evidence to determine criminal responsibility. In practice, that meant no suspect could be charged, and the event remained legally undefined, neither abduction, nor homicide, nor confirmed accident. The McCanns returned to the United Kingdom under intense media scrutiny. Supporters framed them as victims of investigative error. Critics accused them of negligence. The divide was not merely public. It reflected cultural and procedural differences between two nations forced to share one mystery. As years passed, the case survived through symbols: a yellow ribbon, a photograph of a smiling child with green eyes, a recurring headline, "Still Missing." Documentaries and books revisited the same set of facts with alternating conclusions. The police archives, 40,000 pages, became both a source of information and an emblem of futility. When the British government reactivated the investigation in 2011 under Operation Grange, it was less a restart and more a re-evaluation. The review team, composed of detectives from the Metropolitan Police, adopted a cold case methodology, rebuild the timeline, cross-reference all testimonies, and identify inconsistencies. This process generated renewed media attention, but few tangible results. The official conclusion stated that there was no definitive evidence to indicate whether Madeleine McCann is alive or deceased. Throughout the following decade, various persons of interest were identified and later dismissed. Each announcement reignited global coverage, followed by the same cycle of speculation and silence. Eventually, the investigation turned toward forensic reanalysis, re-examining samples with more advanced DNA technology. Yet after nearly 20 years, degradation and contamination limited what could be recovered. For the families involved, time did not heal uncertainty. The McCanns continued to mark the anniversary of their daughter's disappearance every May. Portugal remained divided between empathy and skepticism. The world, meanwhile, adapted the story into a cautionary framework, not just about child safety, but about the power and the distortion of visibility in the digital age. In June of 2020, the German federal criminal police identified a new suspect in the Madeleine McCann case, Christian Bruckner, a German citizen with a criminal record that included burglary, sexual assault, and drug trafficking. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, he lived intermittently in the Algarve region of Portugal, alternating between small houses and a camper van. Investigators discovered that a mobile phone linked to Bruckner had received a call near the Ocean Club Resort around the time of the disappearance. It was not proof of guilt, but it became the first tangible lead in years. German prosecutors soon declared they believed Madeleine was dead and that Bruckner was responsible. Still, no physical evidence supported their conclusion, no DNA, no body and no witnesses. The announcement changed the tone of the investigation. For the first time, an authority outside Portugal or the United Kingdom publicly classified the case as a probable homicide. The declaration did not close the inquiry, but it altered how the world interpreted it. In Germany, prosecutors examined Bruckner's past and linked him to crimes against women in tourist areas. Thousands of photos and digital files were seized from his previous addresses, but none connected him directly to Madeleine. Through his lawyer, Bruckner denied any involvement, describing the accusations as fiction under pressure. British and Portuguese police reacted cautiously. The Metropolitan Police insisted their inquiry remained a missing persons case. Portugal's judiciary police confirmed cooperation, but avoided speculation. The difference in approach reflected both legal boundaries and the enduring uncertainty surrounding the case. Between 2021 and 2023, new searches were carried out across southern Portugal. One operation took place near a reservoir close to the city of Silve, about 50 kilometers from Praia da Luz. Divers, radar teams and forensic experts worked for days. Nothing was found. Each attempt reignited headlines, followed by disappointment. By the end of 2023, Bruckner remained imprisoned in Germany for unrelated crimes. Prosecutors maintained that the investigation into Madeleine McCann was active, though progress seemed increasingly unlikely. After 16 years, the mystery endured, visible everywhere but proven nowhere. By mid-2025, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann had transformed from a case file into a symbol of endurance. 18 years after the event, investigators across 3 countries still listed it as active, yet no one expected a definitive outcome. The language of the reports had grown static, formal, procedural, and drained of discovery. In Germany, prosecutors confirmed that Christian Bruckner remained a suspect, but admitted progress was unlikely. Without forensic evidence or credible witnesses, the case could not move forward. In Britain, Operation Grange had been reduced to a small unit of analysts maintaining archival access. Their task was not investigation but preservation. The inquiry had become a matter of memory, ensuring that what existed was not lost to time. In Portugal, the judiciary police continued to cooperate quietly. Their statements were brief, almost ritualistic. All lines of inquiry remain under examination, the meaning was more symbolic than operational. The file remained open because it could not be closed. Over time, the case detached itself from its own facts. It became an idea, a reflection of how societies respond to uncertainty. Every country projected its own story onto it, a test of law, media, or faith. Criminologists began calling it the case that never ends, a study in how mystery can outlive truth. Digital archives now hold thousands of reports, interviews, and statements. Some contradict each other, others repeat information that no longer matters. Artificial intelligence has been used to scan the data, cross-referencing names, dates, and descriptions. The results revealed patterns, none decisive, all incomplete. For the public, Madeleine McCann's image remains a symbol of both loss and persistence. The case continues, not because of new leads, but because of collective need. People want resolution, something official to close a chapter that has stretched too long. Yet in the absence of answers, the story has taken another form. It is no longer just about what happened to a single child, but about how the modern world handles the unknown. Madeleine's name endures in the archives, in media databases, and in the collective imagination, a question that still waits for an answer no one can give. As the years stretched beyond 2 decades, the case of Madeleine McCann moved from investigation to cultural memory. The name no longer referred only to a missing child, but to a phenomenon that redefined how the world reacts to tragedy in real time. Sociologists describe it as a media relic, an event preserved through repetition. Each generation encounters the case through documentaries, books, or digital archives. The image of the child, bright eyes, half smile, circulates endlessly, detached from the details of the night she vanished. It has become an icon, stripped of chronology, existing everywhere and nowhere at once. For investigators, this transformation brought a quiet resignation. Theories once debated in courtrooms now lived online, shaped by speculation rather than law. The crime scene had dissolved into narrative. Each version of the story, told and retold, layered new interpretations over fading evidence. Journalists began calling it the case that taught the world to watch itself. It revealed how modern societies consume investigation as performance, how empathy, outrage, and curiosity merge into one endless cycle of attention. In Portugal, Praia da Luz remains the same seaside town, yet its image is permanently linked to the mystery. Residents speak of the past with distance, as though it belongs to another lifetime. Tourists still visit the site, some leaving flowers, others merely taking photos. The town lives between memory and tourism. Academics refer to the McCann story as a social echo, the point where tragedy becomes myth. It no longer evolves through discovery, but through repetition. The more it is retold, the further it moves from truth. 18 years after her disappearance, the case remains both open and untouchable. It is no longer about solving a crime, but about what the crime has become, a mirror of collective obsession, reflecting how the need for answers can outlive the possibility of finding them. As the investigation passes its 19th year, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann stands as one of the longest-running unsolved cases in modern history. What began as an urgent search in a small coastal village has evolved into a global symbol of endurance, speculation, and the boundaries of truth. The official documents continue to grow, but their content no longer changes the narrative. Every report reaffirms what the world already knows, that there is no definitive evidence of what happened, no verified timeline, no single version of events that can survive scrutiny. What remains is process, the ritual of keeping the file alive so that it is never truly closed. Across 3 nations, investigators still carry the name in their systems. New generations of officers inherit digital archives compiled by people who have long retired. Each team reviews the same files, the same photographs, the same interviews, not to find something new, but to ensure that nothing was ever missed. Experts describe this as the archival phase of justice, when the pursuit of resolution becomes a commitment to memory. It is where investigation turns into preservation, where the hope for truth transforms into the duty of record-keeping. In public discourse, the case continues to resurface in cycles. Documentaries revisit the evidence. Journalists analyze contradictions. Online communities dissect every frame, every word, every possible clue. Yet the center of the story remains empty, a vacuum that pulls speculation toward it. Decade after decade, the Madeleine McCann case has become both a tragedy and a reflection of the human condition. The refusal to accept the unknown. It endures because it mirrors something essential about us, our obsession with answers, even when none exist. Time has not solved the mystery, but it has defined it. What remains today is not the hope of resolution, but the record of the search itself, a story that belongs to the archive, to memory and to history. By 2027, the Madeleine McCann case had become a paradox of modern history, mystery too well known to be, forgotten and too uncertain to be solved. Every attempt to close the file had met the same obstacle, the absence of proof strong enough to silence doubt. For investigators, the case now lives as an administrative ritual. Every few months, reports are updated, communications refiled, archives reorganized. The machinery of justice continues to operate, even if the engine of discovery has long stopped running. The goal is no longer revelation, but preservation. Across Europe, journalists and documentary filmmakers still revisit the story. They search for angles unseen, contradictions unresolved. But each new production repeats the same pattern, a retelling that circles the same facts, the same names, the same unanswered questions. The mystery no longer expands, it repeats. The McCann investigation has transcended its own origin. It now belongs to the collective subconscious, part cautionary tale, part modern myth. The photograph of the missing child has become both evidence and symbol, representing every unanswered disappearance that followed. In the digital age, the case persists through algorithms. Every anniversary, every headline, every speculative theory revives its visibility online. Artificial intelligence systems preserve its trace across languages and decades, ensuring that the name Madeleine McCann never disappears, even if the truth has. Some mysteries end in silence. Others live forever, because silence cannot contain them. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann belongs to the latter. It remains a case without closure, but not without meaning, a testament to the limits of knowledge and the persistence of the human need to search. Even when by 2028, the Madeleine McCann case had reached a strange equilibrium, a place where nothing new could be added, yet nothing could be removed. It existed as both history and presence, a file too famous to fade. Investigators, journalists, and the public had all become part of its continuity, each generation inheriting a mystery that refused to belong to the past. In official terms, the investigation persists. The files remain open, digitally archived, cross-referenced, and secured in 3 countries. But the energy has changed. The people who once searched now maintain. The systems that once pursued now preserve. The machinery of justice hums quietly, sustained by duty rather than hope. Philosophers and criminologists call it the endurance of uncertainty. It is what happens when truth slips beyond reach but never beyond relevance. The McCann case has become a mirror for modern civilization, proof that technology can store information, but not certainty, that institutions can maintain order, but not resolution. The village of Praia da Luz continues its quiet routine. Tourists still walk the same narrow streets, unaware of the invisible weight that lingers there. The sea remains unchanged, the same tide that once whispered under the night of May 3rd. 2007. Time has reshaped everything except the question itself. Madeleine's name endures not as a case, but as a symbol of loss, of persistence, of the human refusal to forget. In the end, her story is no longer about what was done, but about what was never known. It lives in the spaces between facts, between the world that searches and the silence that answers nothing. There are mysteries that fade when forgotten, and there are those that echo endlessly, not because they demand attention, but because they cannot die. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is one such echo, a sound that will continue to resonate long after the world stops listening. By 2029, the case of Madeleine McCann had become something larger than law. It was part of the fabric of collective awareness. Generations had grown up hearing her name. not as a headline, but as a symbol woven into modern folklore. The investigation had evolved into a ghostly routine, a cycle of review, reaffirmation, and remembrance. Officially, the file remains open. Unofficially, it exists in a state of perpetual review, the stage where investigators no longer search for truth but ensure that the absence of it is properly documented. The machinery of justice does not allow a mystery of this scale to simply end. Each year, new officers are assigned to read, classify, and confirm that the archive remains intact. In Britain, Germany, and Portugal, the same documents are digitally mirrored across secure servers, stored redundantly to survive time itself. Even if no human eye ever reads them again, the data persists, preserved like a relic of civilization's obsession with answers. Experts in criminology now describe the McCann case as the turning point between traditional and postmodern investigation, the moment when data replaced discovery. Theories exist not to solve, but to sustain. The case became an organism of its own, self-replicating, eternal, looping through every format the digital world can provide. And yet, in that persistence, something deeply human remains. Behind the codes, files, and headlines lies a story that still aches. It is a story of parents, of failure, of humanity, staring into the limits of what can be known. The Madeleine McCann investigation continues, not as an open wound, but as a scar that history refuses to heal. The question that began on a quiet night in Praia da Luz still vibrates through time. It is no longer a matter of evidence, but of existence. By 2030, the Madeleine McCann case remains open, but time has stripped it of urgency. What continues now is not investigation, but maintenance, a ritual of revisiting what has already been examined. The archive grows not through discovery, but through duplication. Updated formats, redigitized files, newer software, preserving the same uncertainty in higher resolution. The institutions involved, Portuguese, British, German, have learned to coexist with the unresolved. Each country carries its version of the truth, shaped by law, culture, and distance. The official tone of all statements is identical, cautious, formal, and without hope of conclusion. The system speaks to preserve formality, not faith. Researchers argue that the McCann case reveals a paradox of modern justice. It demonstrates how, in the age of total information, disappearance remains possible. Data may survive forever, but understanding does not. Even with satellite imaging, genetic tracing, and artificial intelligence, one mystery continues to resist every instrument of progress. In the public imagination, the case has become a loop, a memory that cannot die because it was never buried. Each anniversary resurrects the same coverage, the same theories, the same need to speak her name aloud. In this repetition, the disappearance lives on. Madeleine's story no longer belongs to evidence or witnesses. It belongs to time, the slow, inevitable force that turns tragedy into ritual. As long as someone remembers, the file will not close. And so the question remains, echoing into another decade. Not where she is, but why we still need to ask. By 2031, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann exists entirely within the structure of record. There are no new searches, no new suspects, no new developments. Yet the case continues, not through evidence, but through maintenance. Servers hum quietly in 3 nations, preserving digital archives that grow by megabytes, each year without adding a single new fact. In this quiet persistence, the investigation has become a mirror of civilization itself. It reflects how humanity clings to questions even when answers are impossible. The McCann case endures because it no longer depends on discovery. It depends on remembrance. Officials from all 3 countries issue the same annual statement, brief, formal, unwavering. The investigation remains open. The words no longer convey hope. They preserve order. They exist so the silence has a form. Philosophers now call the McCann file a monument of absence, a structure built not from truth, but from the refusal to forget. It stands at the crossroads of technology and memory, where human loss meets the immortality of data. For the McCann family, the passage of time has shifted meaning. Hope no longer lives in discovery, but in endurance, in ensuring that Madeleine's name remains a living presence. For them, silence is not closure. It is resistance. In an era where every image, word, and location can be tracked, the mystery of one vanished child continues to defy explanation. The more the world evolves, the more it reminds itself that some events remain untouchable, not because of secrecy, but because of the limits of knowing. And so the story persists year after year, generation after generation, an eternal reminder that justice, like memory, does not always end with answers. Sometimes it simply continues. By 2032, the Madeleine McCann case had become less about law and more about meaning. It was no longer an investigation. It was a reflection of how modern civilization processes tragedy. The facts had not changed in decades, yet the case continued to appear in lectures, debates, and documentaries. It existed now as a reference point for loss, a study in collective psychology. Universities included it in criminology, and media courses as the eternal case where evidence, myth, and memory coexist. The original documents, police reports, interviews, phone records, were now fully digitized, stored across international databases. But the digital clarity did not resolve the human opacity. The more information accumulated, the less certainty existed. The McCann story had become a global mirror. Some saw in it the failure of institutions, others the endurance of love. It embodied both obsession and devotion. It showed how humanity confronts the limits of logic, how faith fills the space that proof cannot. Every few years, a new documentary reignites public attention. Experts re-examine old interviews with advanced audio tools. Forensic analysts simulate the apartment in 3D. Algorithms cross-reference witness descriptions. Each effort ends the same way, confirmation of what is already known. Nothing conclusive. The case survives because it represents something beyond crime, the persistence of a question in a world built on answers. It endures as a quiet reminder that truth, even when chased endlessly, may remain unreachable. Madeleine's name has transcended context. It lives in the digital ether, unbound by geography or time. And as long as the systems that hold her file continue to run, her story will remain, suspended between code and consciousness. In 2033, a formal review of the Madeleine McCann case was announced. Not to reopen the investigation, but to preserve its history. The British, Portuguese, and German authorities agreed to compile the final digital index, a unified record of everything collected since 2007. It was called the Continuity File. The operation lasted months. Thousands of documents were reclassified, scanned, and encrypted. The goal was not discovery, but legacy. Once completed, the file would remain publicly accessible, a monument to transparency and to the limits of human pursuit. When the review ended, the conclusion was familiar yet profound. There was no definitive evidence to determine what happened to Madeleine McCann. The disappearance remained officially unresolved, but something shifted in tone. For the first time, the authorities framed the case not as failure, but as witness, a long record of collective effort, preserved for those who would one day study what it. By 2034, the Madeleine McCann case had become timeless. It no longer belonged to law, family, or nation. It belonged to memory. The digital archive, preserved across continents, ensured that her story could never vanish completely. The mystery has entered the realm of mythology. People no longer ask who or how, but why. It is discussed beside the great unsolved stories of human history. Proof that not every question is meant to be answered. For the McCann family, life has continued in quiet dignity. They have chosen not to erase the story, but to let it live as it must, in echoes, in remembrance, in the faint persistence of hope. The case endures not as a wound, but as a mirror. It shows that the pursuit of truth is infinite, that some stories exist to remind humanity of its limits. In the silence of digital memory, somewhere between light and shadow, the file remains open. The name Madeleine McCann lives not in conclusion, but in continuity. And perhaps, in that eternal space between fact and faith, she will never truly disappear.